My brother called me on a Thursday night, and the moment I heard his voice, I knew something was badly wrong. Nathan doesn't cry. He never has, not at our dad's funeral, not when his dog got hit by a car on the Trans-Canada back in 2009, not even when our mom got her cancer diagnosis 3 years ago. He's the steady one. The one who holds everything together while the rest of us fall apart. So when I picked up the phone and heard that shaky exhale, that sound a man makes when he's been holding something in for so long that his whole chest is caving, I set down my coffee and sat very still. I don't know who else to call, he said. His name is Nathan Kowalski. He's 44 years old, 2 years older than me, and he works as a structural engineer for a firm out of Hamilton. He's the kind of man who shows up early, stays late, never complains, always has a plan. Growing up, I thought Nathan was the most capable person I'd ever met. I still do, honestly, which is exactly why what he told me next hit me so hard. It's Renata, he said. Renata, his wife of 22 years. 22 years. I want to be fair here because I know there are two sides to every marriage, and I only ever see one. But what Nathan told me that night, sitting on the edge of his truck in the Canadian Tire parking lot in Ancaster, because he was too ashamed to say it inside his own house, that wasn't a story with two equal sides. That was a man describing 22 years of being slowly, methodically taken apart. I listened for almost 3 hours. Nathan met Renata Vasilyev back in 2002 at a work function in Burlington. She was sharp, funny, beautiful in a way that made you feel like you had to earn her attention. Nathan was 22 and completely unprepared for a woman like that. He fell hard and fast, and they were engaged within 8 months, married by the following spring. I was his best man. I remember standing up there watching him and thinking that guy is the luckiest man alive. I had no idea. The first thing you need to understand about Renata is that she was never obvious about it. That's the thing people don't get when you try to explain a situation like this. They think control looks like screaming and throwing things. They think you'd know it if you saw it. But Renata was quiet about it, patient. She built it brick by brick over years, and by the time Nathan could see the shape of what she'd built, he was already living inside it. It started small. In the first year of their marriage, Renata suggested they consolidate their finances into a single joint account. Her account, technically the one she'd had since university, because it would be simpler. Nathan thought that seemed reasonable. He was busy, she was organized, why not? His paychecks from the engineering firm started going in as direct deposits. Renata managed the bills, the savings, the investments. Nathan got what she called spending money, deposited back to a secondary card she'd set up for him. $200 a week, and he was supposed to account for every dollar of it. He was making $96,000 a year, and he had a $200 weekly allowance. I didn't know this. For years, I didn't know this. Nathan didn't tell me because he was embarrassed, and because Renata had a way of framing it that made it sound almost sensible. We're saving for the house. You know how I am about budgets. It just works better this way. He repeated her words like they were his own. That's the thing about being in it. You start to lose track of which thoughts are yours. They bought a house in Dundas in 2008, a 4-bedroom on the escarpment side. Beautiful place. Renata's name was on the deed because Nathan's credit had taken a hit that year. A billing error with the CRA that took 2 years to sort out, not his fault. But Renata moved fast on the house paperwork, and by the time everything was resolved, the legal arrangement had already been set. Nathan told himself it didn't matter, they were married. What was hers was his. Except it wasn't really. He couldn't have friends over without checking with Renata first. I don't mean he asked her as a courtesy. I mean he genuinely needed her permission, because if he didn't, she'd be cold and cutting for days afterward. Little comments about the mess, about how she didn't feel comfortable in her own home, about how he never considered her feelings. So Nathan stopped inviting people. Just gradually, over time, the invitations got fewer and further between until they stopped entirely. Their boys, Marcus, who's now 19, and Leo, who just turned 16, grew up watching their father ask permission. I think about that a lot. I think about what that teaches a kid, watching the strongest man you know shrink himself down to fit someone else's expectations. The worst thing Renata ever did, the thing that Nathan told me about last that night in the parking lot, the thing that made my hands go cold, happened in 2019. Nathan had been at his firm for 11 years at that point. He was up for a senior project manager position. It would have meant a $40,000 salary increase, and the kind of professional recognition he'd been working towards since he started. His boss, a guy named David Park, had pulled him aside in November to tell him it was basically his. He just needed to get through the formal review process in January. He told Renata that night over dinner. She smiled and said congratulations. She asked questions about what the new role would involve. She seemed genuinely happy for him. Then she called David Park's office the next week, identified herself as Nathan's wife, and expressed, very calmly, very professionally, concerns about Nathan's mental and emotional state. She said he'd been struggling with anxiety, that she was worried the added responsibility might not be right for him at this stage. She framed it as a concerned spouse reaching out, because Nathan was too proud to say anything himself. David Park was a decent man who took it seriously. The role went to someone else. Nathan didn't find out what happened for 3 years. He'd always assumed he simply hadn't made the cut. He found out by accident in 2022 when David, who'd retired by then, mentioned it offhandedly at a firm alumni dinner. Mentioned it like Nathan obviously already knew. Like it was old history. Nathan said he sat in his car outside the restaurant for 45 minutes before he could drive. That's when he called me. I'm going to be honest with you. My first reaction, sitting there in my kitchen in Kitchener, listening to my brother describe the last 22 years of his life, was rage. The kind of rage that makes your jaw ache because you're grinding your teeth without realizing it. I wanted to drive to Dundas that night and say things I couldn't take back. But I didn't. Because Nathan didn't need my anger. He needed someone to think clearly. We stayed on the phone until almost 1 in the morning. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, an idea started to form. Probably not the most sensible idea. Definitely not what a therapist would recommend. But Nathan and I are identical twins, and we've been pulling this particular trick since we were 7 years old, and something about the whole situation made me feel like it was the only move left. Let me come up for a weekend, I said. What do you mean? Nathan said. You know what I mean. There was a long pause. She'd never fall for it, he said. But I could hear something in his voice, not skepticism, hope. Let me explain something about being an identical twin. People think it stops mattering after you hit a certain age, that the novelty wears off and people learn to tell you apart, and eventually you're just two separate people who happen to look alike. And that's mostly true. But Nathan and I have always been eerily similar. Same voice, same mannerisms, same way of tilting our heads when we're thinking. We kept our hair the same length for most of our 30s almost by accident. I've been mistaken for Nathan at his own firm Christmas party. His colleagues apologized to me for interrupting. Renata had met me maybe a dozen times in 22 years. Nathan had made sure of that because Renata always found reasons to keep his family at a distance. At Christmas we met at my parents' place in St. Catharines, never at their house. She was always pleasant to me, but pleasant in that careful, managed way that means nothing is actually being shared. I genuinely believed she might not be able to tell us apart, not definitively, not under the right conditions, so we made a plan. It took about 6 weeks of preparation. Nathan coached me on the details of their daily life, the routines, the specific phrases Renata used, the things he was and wasn't allowed to do without friction. I took notes. It felt surreal, writing down the rules of my brother's home like I was studying for an exam. Don't touch the thermostat without asking. Don't invite anyone over without at least 4 days' notice. Don't make plans for Saturday mornings because that's when she does her grocery run and she needs the car. Don't bring up the promotion or the fishing trip or the time her sister came to stay for 3 weeks without warning. The plan was simple. Nathan would take a week off work, tell Renata he needed to drive to St. Catharines to help our mom with some repairs around the house. True enough that it wouldn't feel like a lie. I would arrive after he left, already in his clothes, already briefed. Renata worked from home. She ran an online consulting business, but she was often in her home office until 4 or 5 in the evening. The boys were in school. The house would be mostly quiet. What did we expect to happen? Honestly, neither of us was entirely sure. Nathan wanted to see, from the outside, by watching me live 1 week of his life, whether what he was describing was real, whether he was exaggerating it in his head the way he sometimes wondered, and maybe part of him wanted Renata to face someone who wasn't going to comply, who wasn't going to apologize for things that didn't need apologizing for. I drove up from Kitchener on a Sunday evening in early March. Nathan had already left. He called me when he was on the QEW, and I pulled into the driveway 10 minutes later. The house was exactly as he'd described. Big, clean, a little too perfectly arranged. The kind of house where you feel slightly afraid to put your glass down on the wrong surface. Renata answered the door in a sweater and reading glasses, her hair pulled back. She looked at me, and I held my breath for just a second, and she smiled. How was the drive, she said. Not bad, I said. Not bad at all. The first morning was almost peaceful. Renata brought coffee to the kitchen island without being asked, sat across from me with her laptop, and ran through what she described as the week's schedule. I had notes in my pocket that Nathan had written out for me, and I'd memorized enough of them that I could nod in the right places. But then she did something that stopped me. She pushed a small notepad across the island. "I need you to write down your expenses for the week," she said, without looking up from her screen. "Anything over $20, I need the receipt." I stared at the notepad. Nathan had told me about this. I'd written it down and read it back, and somehow it hadn't fully registered until that moment. Seeing the notepad, seeing how naturally she placed it there, how utterly normal it seemed to her. This was just Tuesday morning. This was just how it worked. "Sure," I said, and I put the notepad in my shirt pocket. On Tuesday evening, I told her I was thinking about calling my old university friend Thomas, who lived in Brantford, to see if he wanted to grab a beer sometime that week. I said it the way Nathan had taught me not to say things, casually, in passing, not as a request. Renata looked up from her book. "You didn't mention that," she said. "I know. I'm mentioning it now. It would be nice to have a heads up. That's all. It's a beer with a friend," I said. "I'll be home by 10. She was quiet for a moment. "I just think communication matters." "I agree," I said. "I'm communicating. I'm telling you right now." She went back to her book. But the room felt different. There was a temperature drop that had nothing to do with the thermostat. I called Thomas that night. Nathan had actually briefed him. Thomas had known Nathan for years and knew something was going on, though I kept the details vague. We met at a pub in Brantford on Wednesday. Nothing significant happened, but when I got home at 9:40, Renata was still awake in the living room, and she was wearing this specific expression Nathan had warned me about. Not angry, not upset, just waiting. Calibrated disappointment. "How was it?" she said. "Really good," I said. I sat down and turned on the hockey game. I didn't explain myself. I didn't apologize. I watched the Leafs lose to the Senators, and I ate the crackers I found in the pantry, and I didn't ask permission to do either. By Thursday, something had shifted. It's hard to describe what it felt like from the inside, being in that house. I kept thinking about what Nathan had said on the phone. I lose track of which thoughts are mine. I'd been there 3 days and I could already feel the pull of it, the way the house had its own gravity, the way Renata's silences shaped the air. I'd catch myself about to apologize for something and have to physically stop myself, remind myself that I was the one choosing not to comply, that it was a choice. Nathan had been living inside that gravity for 22 years. On Thursday afternoon, Renata came out of her home office while I was on a work call of my own. I was working remotely that week, just managing some things by phones, and she stood in the doorway until I finished. When I hung up, she said, "I need to talk to you." She sat down across from me with the careful posture of someone who has thought about what they're going to say. "I feel like you've been different this week," she said, "and I need to know what's going on with you." I looked at her for a long moment, and something I hadn't expected happened. I felt almost sorry for her. Not in a condescending way, just, she genuinely seemed to believe that my not asking permission to call a friend was a symptom of something being wrong with me, like independence was a warning sign. "I've just been thinking," I said, "about how things have been." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm thinking about what I want, and I think that's okay." "Of course it's okay," she said quickly, too quickly. "I've never told you what you can or can't want." I didn't argue with her. I just nodded and let the silence sit there. That night, Nathan's older son Marcus, home from his first year at McMaster for a long weekend, sat with me at the kitchen table after Renata had gone to bed. Marcus is 19, studying mechanical engineering, quiet in the way Nathan used to be quiet before years of marriage taught him that being quiet was safer. He poured himself a glass of water and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You're different this week, Dad." I looked at him carefully. "Is that okay?" I said. He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "Actually, yeah, I think so." We didn't say anything else. But there was something in his face. Relief, I think, is the right word. The particular relief of someone who's been waiting a long time to see something and has started to wonder if they ever would. Nathan came back on Saturday morning. Renata knew he was coming. I'd told her the night before, and she was in the kitchen when he pulled into the driveway. I met him at the door and we did the switchback in about 4 minutes. I handed him his house key. We traded cars in the garage. I slipped out the side and drove to the Tim Hortons on Wilson to wait. He texted me 40 minutes later. She knows something is different. She hasn't figured out what. Then, an hour after that, she's upset. But she's actually talking to me, like actually talking, not performing then. Later that afternoon, she cried. First time I've seen her cry in maybe 10 years. She asked me if I was going to leave her. I sat with my phone and read that last message twice. I don't know everything that was said in that house on Saturday afternoon, because it was Nathan's marriage and Nathan's conversation, and some things aren't mine to know. What I can tell you is what he told me afterward. He told her the truth. Not about the switch, not yet, but about everything else. About the promotion. About finding out what happened at the firm. About the $200 weekly card and the notepad for receipts. And the 22 years of asking for things that should have just been his. Renata sat across from him and didn't defend herself the way Nathan had expected. She went quiet in a different way than her usual quiet. He said it was like watching something settle. Like the performance stopped, and for the first time in a very long time there was just a person sitting across from him, frightened and uncertain, and smaller, somehow. She said, "I didn't realize it had gotten this bad." Nathan said, "I think part of you did." She said, "I think I was scared of losing you." And Nathan said something that I think will stay with me for a long time. He said, "You were so scared of losing me that you built a cage to keep me in. And then you were confused when I seemed far away. I want to tell you it all got resolved in a weekend. It didn't. Real life doesn't work like that, and I think you know that as well as I do." Nathan and Renata are still in counseling. They started in April with a therapist in Hamilton, a woman named Dr. Christine Haley, who specializes in couples, and specifically, control dynamics in long-term partnerships. I won't pretend I know how that's going to end. What I can tell you is that Nathan's paychecks are going into a joint account that he has equal access to. That he's been fishing twice, once with Thomas, once with Marcus, who apparently took to it immediately and wants to go again in June. That he called me last week just to tell me the Leafs game was on, and did I want to listen over the phone? Like we used to do when we were teenagers before either of us could afford cable. The house in Dundas is the same house. The escarpment's still there, the 4 bedrooms, the surface where you're afraid to put your glass down. But Nathan told me something shifted in the week after I left. That Renata reorganized her home office to face the window instead of the door. That she asked Leo what he wanted for his birthday instead of deciding for him. Small things. Maybe nothing. Maybe the beginning of something. I think about what Marcus said to me at the kitchen table. "You're different this week, Dad." And I think about what it means that a 19-year-old boy recognized something in a few days that the rest of us had been missing for 22 years. Kids see the shape of things more clearly than we do sometimes. They don't have the words for it, but they see it. Tell me, where are you watching from today? I'm curious whether any of this sounds familiar to you, because I have a feeling this kind of thing is more common than people want to admit. Men especially. We're taught that needing help is weakness and that love means absorbing whatever comes at you without complaint. Nathan had people around him his whole life, me, our parents, his sons, his colleagues, and not one of us knew. Not really. Not until he was sitting in a parking lot at 11 at night, unable to go home. If that sounds like someone you know, or if it sounds like you, I hope this story is useful to you. Not as a blueprint. Lord knows swapping places with your twin isn't a solution most people have available. But as proof maybe that things can be named, that naming them out loud to someone who will actually listen is sometimes the first thing. And sometimes the first thing is enough to start. Nathan's okay. More okay than he was. That's what I've got for now, and for now it's enough.